Hi, my name is Karolina Sieler, and I am a founder of a platform called firstclassllb.com. And this is a platform which helps law students just like you to get first in both their essays and their exams in law. So make sure you check it out if you are up for getting very high marks in your essays and exams. What I want to talk to you about today is how to remember statute sections for law exams. Now, this is something that is very relevant if you are, especially if you're sitting physical exams in the classroom where you can't have any notes with you and you really have to remember and have memorized a lot of different statute sections. And the reason why I wanted to create a video about this is that statute sections can be quite dry. Usually it's just a number, it's an act, it's a number, and then an explanation of what a specific section introduced, which it's unlike cases which can be a little bit more playful. You can use different memorizing techniques with them. Statute sections are just very, very dry to remember for most law students. So I want to give you a few tips that will help you a little bit with this process of memorizing statute sections before exams, and that will also show you that you shouldn't get too overwhelmed and you shouldn't really try to do it all. So let's start with my first tip, which is you should select only the most relevant sections. So depending on the area of law and on the topic, some topics are more heavy with case law, whereas other topics are more heavy with statute sections. Now, if in your lecture for a specific topic you only have about 3 or 4 sections that your lecturer mentioned, then you should probably be memorizing all of them. But if you are dealing with a topic which your lecturer mentioned during their lecture, about 20 different sections, it's a given that you won't be able to memorize all of them before the exam, and neither should you try to. Because it will just confuse you, and most of them you will not use during your exam anyway. So even though very often in some universities at least, when students ask their lecturers, what should we revise for the exam, what is the crucial thing about this specific topic, about this specific lecture, the lecturers are often not really cooperative there, and they will just tell you have to revise everything. Don't get scared by this. It's not true. What they are trying to do is they are trying to make sure that you learn as much as you can before the exam. But the truth is that it's very unrealistic to have an expectation of a student to be able to study and memorize everything that the lecturer talked about during the lecture, especially if the content of the lecture is very broad. So don't be scared by this if your lecturer tells you that. Just if they are not very helpful, try to understand and figure out on your own which statute sections are most relevant. So pick about 3 to 5 different statute sections per topic that are the most relevant. And the way that you would try to figure this out is you would go over the lectures and you would try to remember which statute sections your lecturer talked the most about. And you can also tell sometimes by the slides. So sometimes in the lecture slides, the lecturer actually has included an explanation of some sections, but not of others. So some others they could have just kind of put in there. So Human Rights Act Section 4, and that's it. And they haven't really talked about it during the lecture. They haven't really mentioned anything on the lecture slides, so you can that immediately tells you that specific section is not very relevant, whereas others that your lecturer talked about a lot, and especially if they made a very big point about this is an important section, those are the sections that you should definitely memorize for your exam. Another tip I have for you is try to avoid memorizing too many subsections. So subsections are those kind of sub-points under the main section. So an example of a main section would be Human Rights Act 1998, Section 4. And then that section, number 4, can have, let's say, 5 different subsections. And the way that you would know what those subsections are and how many there are is you would look at the numbers in the brackets under Section 4. So you would look at the Human Rights Act 1998, Section 4, and then maybe you have in brackets number 1, and then some text next to it. Maybe you have in brackets underneath number 2, and then some other text next to it. So these are called subsections. And their role is usually either to provide some examples of when explaining and clarifying what the main section is talking about, or to just provide examples of when that specific main section is actually applicable. Now, if you are sitting traditional exams in the classroom where you have to have memorized a lot of different resources and you have very little time to write your answer and you can't have any notes with you, then memorizing a lot of subsections will just be a waste of time because you will just not be able to recall them, and it's very unlikely that you will have enough time during the exam to actually use them as well. So instead you would just remember the main section, and if there is anything crucial in the subsection, you would just mention it as the main section. So even though there might be some crucial information in the Human Rights Act 1998 Section 4 subsection 3, so in brackets 3, you would just quote this during your exam as Human Rights Act 1998 Section 4. That's it, full stop. There's really no need to remember and memorize all the brackets. Now, this is for traditional exams. If you're writing exams, which especially now with COVID, are getting more and more popular with universities, which are done online, and where you are kind of able to have your notes with you and you are able to have everything ready, there you should be using the subsections as much as possible, because the more detailed and precise you get with your answers, the better and the higher marks you'll score. The last tip I want to share with you, not actually the last one, but the next one, is you have to try to use some memorizing techniques, especially if you're revising for traditional exams where you have to sit them in a classroom. So you could use, for example, flashcards where you put the name of the number of the section and the act, the name of the act on one side, and on the other side the explanation, and just use those to try to memorize the section better and quicker. You could use mnemonics, you could use mind maps. Mind maps especially are quite useful with memorizing sections, especially if you're memorizing them from a few different sections from the same act. So let's say from the Human Rights Act 1998, you have to memorize Section 1, Section 3, Section 4, and Section 10. And if you're drawing a mind map of those sections, it helps you to illustrate the relationships between the sections, and that way you can remember them a little bit better. And now the very last tip that I have for you is to write down all the sections at the start of your exam. And what I mean by this is this is especially for the physical exams where you're in the classroom, you have to, the moment you look at the question and you know it's about a specific act, I would strongly recommend that you just quickly in bullet points note down all the numbers of the sections and briefly in bullet points explanations of those sections. And this is because it's usually much easier and much quicker for you to recall those numbers and explanations of the sections before you start thinking about the structure of your answer and actually writing it. So once you start doing that, what very often happens is you get a kind of a memory block where you're talking about Section 1 of the Human Rights Act 1988 and you've spent a lot of time talking about it, and then suddenly you need to switch to the next section of your answer and talk about Section 2, and you've forgotten all about it. You've forgotten what number it was, you've forgotten what it was about, what was the explanation, you've forgotten what you were supposed to say about it. And for some reason, it often happens to students during exams. So the best thing to do is to kind of quickly note down the structure of your answer even if you don't note down what you will put in the introduction, conclusion, and the main body of your answer, just note down the sections that you're going to be mentioning and the brief explanations of those sections so that you don't forget them when you start writing your answer. So that's it from me for today. If you want to learn more about how to write first-class law exams, especially, I have created a course called First Class Law Exam Revision Course, to which I'll provide a link to down below. And it's a course that has been really highly appreciated and praised by a lot of my students, and I would strongly recommend that you reach out for it if you're interested in getting a first in your exams, and you kind of want to learn a system or a strategy that you can follow before every single exam to more or less get it guaranteed, or at least significantly increase your chances of getting a first in your exams. That's it from me for today. As I've said, if you have enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up so that I know I should be creating more similar videos in the future. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel to check out the other videos in the future.